All right, welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I'm Abby Robbins.
And I'm Kimberly Culbertson.
And today we are joined by special guest, none other than Danielle Park.
Woo!
Who just so happens to be my wife. That's exciting.
I've been talked about a lot on this podcast.
So
Finally, Danielle shows her face.
You're like a conscious construction celebrity.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's like a special guest expert. Today, we're talking about the subtypes in relationship.
Yes, and I love this because often this is not something that people encounter if they've done the basics and typology. They don't necessarily encounter this, but subtypes can be a huge tension point in the context of relationships.
Yeah.
And knowing subtypes can unlock some things in a friendship or in a working relationship or in a partnership that just as much as typology can, I think.
Yeah. Well, and we have that experience for sure. Like being married, we in our early relationship, we went to couples therapy and all that stuff. And then I got the book, Subtypes in Relationship from Peter O'Hanrahan while I was at training in Menlo Park several years ago. And I was like reading through it. And I remember being on the phone with you because I like called you every evening. And I was like, oh my God. It was like that he had taken notes from our couples sessions and like it just wrote it down. It
explained everything.
It did.
Yeah.
It was a little stressful, honestly.
In that you were so seen and exposed, or we were, but it was also, I mean, it gave us tools, I believe, to relate to each other a little bit better. So,
and I think having the language for it, like there was no relief, like, oh, this is making so much sense.
Yeah, for sure. There was definitely some relief there, for sure. But we brought Danielle on today because Kim and I are different subtypes. So we have different dominant instincts. Kim, you're
social.
And I'm sexual or one-to-one. But then Danielle just so happens to be self-pres. And that means the three of us here now represent one of each of the slices of the pie. So that's why we brought Danielle on to talk about being self-pres, because we both are self-pres repressed.
You sure are.
We have very little access to that, where Danielle has a lot.
So much.
For better or for worse, right?
It's always for better or for worse in the Enneagram.
Everything about the Enneagram.
That's true. In our marriage, my husband and I, neither one of us is self-pres. And we often talk about, like, no one is really, like, guarding the preservation of the unit. And we have some very close friends and neighbors who are both self-pres.
Yeah.
And so we watch them and are like, oh, that's what that would be like if we had that instinct.
If this was represented in our home. We
have to really think, what would a self-pres person do right now? Because we are not preserving, you know?
Yeah. Well, we're going to set up today's episode the same way that we've been doing the rest of the episodes about the types. And we're going to talk about what each subtype does well, what each subtype struggles in relationship, what their work is, and how we can support them. So we're going to have to do this pretty fast because this is a lot of info on each one.
Right.
And I will say that this is this is going to be pretty cursory around the subtypes.
Yes,
We don't have time to do a deep dive on how each instinct shows up for each type.
Yeah, because it makes 27 different types.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Then you throw wings in there and you get, shit gets wild fast. But we're just going to keep it simple.
When you're in an Enneagram crowd, if you say something like, I'll say, like, I'm a social 7 wing 6, and people know so much immediately. And then some people are like, I don't know what any of that means.
It's like, that was a jumble of numbers and letters.
Yeah. So the instincts really take us someplace interesting, but it really expands the options available to us.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, let's start off with you.
Oh, no. Okay.
What
is this a self-pres reaction?
Yeah.
I think it's just I have a lot of anxiety.
Yes.
So I'm nervous.
Okay.
We'll see how it goes. But I've actually been. Oh, please.
We're not nervous about you because you're so fucking awesome.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It's true. I was going to say, I do think, I mean, you asked if that was a self-pres reaction. I mean, I do think a lot of my anxiety stems from the self-pres instinct. Like I think about like I have a tendency towards hypochondria, always thinking like waiting for something to go wrong with my health, you know, just like, oh God, and like fearing what that will mean for life. So it does contribute to anxiety in a lot of ways.
Yeah. But one of the things that Kim has kept me very honest about this season on the podcast is actually starting with what the type does well in a relationship. And you and I have the tendency to both go negative a little faster.
Right.
So what when in terms of relationship, whether like it's intimate relationship or friendships, or I mean, you don't really have coworkers, but you have had them in the past. What do you feel like you do well? Like, what do you think your subtype is offering you in those situations?
Well, I mean, I think about myself as like a spouse and a parent. I mean, keeping things stable. Yeah. Keeping people fed. You know, just like having an eye towards that, like the routine and the daily care and feeding of humans. Yeah. I'm good at that stuff. Yeah. Like to the extent that like you are much better about feeding me than I am. Like, oh yeah. I will get engrossed in something. I will be like wrapped up in something, and I will, if I'm not careful, I will go all day without eating because I don't think about it. Again, repressed. And you're like, you always have like, you know, like Cliff Bars or whatever in your purse. And like, you've always got food on you, and you're like, here, eat this now. Because if you don't, it's going to be a problem. Yeah. I'm very tuned in to like if someone is not doing well, like pinpointing the kind of biological, I guess. Yeah. Foundation of like what's going on. Like, oh, you're hungry, you're tired, you're, you know, like whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's handy. It is. It is really handy. And I think it just kind of goes back to that steadiness that you were talking about. And I think that that's really valuable. Yeah. 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 And I think, you know, I'm pretty good at making sure everyone is resourced, you know, not just with food and water and whatever, but like supplies, right? That they need. Like I think about that with like children and, you know, and like, also, like in my support of you and all your stuff, like I am happy to make sure that like you have your gear and your things. Like I want people to have the whatever resources they need to pursue what they want, do the things that they want. So, and I'm also very aware that like that depends on my like work, and like I have got to you know make sure that we've got money and blah blah blah. Yeah, you know. So just like that heightened awareness of like what are the material necessities in order to move forward and do what we want and have the experiences that we want. What do we need for that? And it does seem as though that really extends to like, it's not just about you. Like it really does. I mean, it very much extends to me, and it very much extends to the kids. And I can see it play out like with your closer friends, that like there is sort of a, that impulse, it doesn't stop with just you. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it so valuable, like the self-pres instinct in relationship. I mean, to what you were saying, really wishing that you and Ben had more of that in your household.
Yeah. I think when I think of self-pres people, and especially the ones that I am closely in relationship with, they guard the foundational things of like, do we have enough? Do we have what we need to be okay? And then the other things, they'll build on that foundation. But those of us who are not self-pres, we can sometimes skip those foundational things. And then we've built this, you know, gorgeous thing, and it's on sand that's sinking, and we're like, oh, I shouldn't have spent all that money in Cabo, you know, like, so
From real life. That was a real life example right there.
Cabo is amazing. But yeah, I think
spoken like a true social 7.
Yeah. The foundational piece, a lot of times people caricature self-pres people as only being about themselves. And I've never experienced that really. Yeah. But the difference between what they're doing, they're guarding that foundational level, whereas like someone who's social is kind of more in that like relational space. They're making some assumptions that foundations are met, you know. And so you want self-pres people in your corner.
I can see that reputation though for like selfishness that you kind of alluded to, because like I'm not available for connection unless that foundation, like I feel secure in it, which takes a lot for me to feel like stable. And so like you often will make bids for like affection or whatever, and I'm not available for it unless I like if the house is a mess, you know,
which or often is.
Yeah, and I'm coming to terms with it. But you know, it's like that kind of thing. Like I want
kids,
things.
Man.
Yeah.
Dogs and kids. Wow.
Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Yeah.
But like I need there to be a certain level of like, you know, things are taken care of in the environment. I feel good in my body, blah, blah, blah. Or else I'm just not available. So I could see how that feels cold.
Yeah.
Or what have you.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, this is a great transition into kind of like the struggles of like being in relationship with a self-pres person is like, you know, especially I think for us in particular, being self-pres repressed, like me being self-pres repressed and generally just not having a lot of access to that energy, right? Like I don't notice that the house is dirty. I don't, you know, I don't have that kind of instinct for those things. So if I'm feeling depleted, what I'm going for in our relationship is something that you're not available for if certain things aren't like tended to.
Yeah. And you can't attend to those things unless your needs for connection have been met. Yeah. Which puts us
in
at
quite
odds.
the stalemate.
Yeah. And it's been challenging, but you know, like that's something that we worked through, like I think with that book and, you know, in conjunction with the therapist and stuff, like if I can just like put my hand on you, like that's enough, right? Like,
I wouldn't call it enough, but
it's a
good start. Yeah. It gets it. And that's the thing is like when you're working with like these intimate relationships in kind of mismatched subtype situations, it's not always that it's going to be enough. It just it has to be a start.
Yeah, it's going to bridge the gap
Well, I think when you have language for something like that, you can kind of between you. First of all, you know. No one's really being an asshole here. We just have different needs and we need things in a different order. And that by itself is really helpful. But sometimes you're going to have more capacity to move toward Abby. And sometimes you're not going to have capacity for that, but Abby will. Or you can both acknowledge that you don't have capacity to translate right now. But there is a translation that's happening. And having the language around it can be so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you feel like as a self-pres person in relationship, like where do you see your work right now? Because I mean, we've kind of talked about the struggles. It can be cold. It can be kind of distant.
Yeah,
it can feel...
and like like to go further into that, like coldness. Like I do notice in myself, like I have a tendency to not see relationships as an end unto themselves and like valuable for their own purposes. I'm like, oh, like. Friends and community, that's helpful because it keeps you safe. Like you have, you know, a spouse is really important because if I get sick, they can help me, whatever, pay the bills, you know? So,
feed the children.
Yeah. Right. So it's like it's like a means to an end and that's kind of shitty. I mean, it's true on some level, like it is true. And like, I don't like thinking that way, like, oh, this it comes like transactional or
and it can be like an objectification in some sorts. Yeah.
So that's a bummer.
Yeah. So what do you feel like is the work for you in those spaces? Like what are you doing to, I don't know, to not think in this way that you feel like is shitty or however you want to phrase it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Those are your words, not mine.
Yeah, right.
I didn't mean that.
Yeah, I don't know because I mean it's definitely like a both and trying to like exist in the tension because like I said, I mean it is true.
Yes. Yeah.
That like that interdependence is just a fact of life and like on some level acknowledging that is just like it's actually runs like beautifully counter to this whole bootstraps, fiercely independent capitalist mentality. So that's like a really good thing. And I don't want to be like looking at my relationships as like just how do they serve me? and my like bid to be safe all the time.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, that's not I mean, I'm not expressing this in any sort of practical work way other than just like,
I mean,
exploring this tension, like how does that work for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think even being conscious of it is the start of the work.
Yeah. But it also highlights like how we can be supportive of people who are self-pres in our lives where, you know, I think about this often in our relationship that like when you start to really spin out, you know, when the like anxiety of like, oh, we're going to end up homeless, or we're going to end up living under a bridge.
I go straight, like it's 0 to 60.
You either have terminal cancer or you're on the verge of homelessness.
It's
like
all terrible.
That is where you like we have those conversations multiple times a week.
Yeah.
I think a way that the way that I support you often is to be like, well, look at the community you have, look at the people in your lives who would not let that happen, right? That like, it's not our survival, our thriving in the world is not just based on how much money you have in the bank.
Right.
Like there are networks of care and those sorts of things. And I'm often like showing your attention to that and be like, you should invest here, like where, you know, the stock market goes up and down and we could be whatever. Investing in community in those sorts of spaces, I feel like is a way to like support self-pres people, kind of leveraging what you said you didn't like about, right? Like, there is a way that like we can only get to the things we can get to, how we can get to them. You know, like leveraging the self-pres instinct to honestly engage in more community and to be in those systems of care, I think is really supportive. Yeah. And just cleaning the house. That is a way you can support self-pres people.
That is so true.
Like, anything
that's what I've learned. I've learned, y'all. I'm learning.
Anything that helps solidify the foundation. If what you're looking for is something that you're building on that, and the foundation has a problem, like being able to address that problem and not leaving it only to the self-pres person, I think is a huge way to help. Even if what you're looking for is emotional intimacy or fun, or, you know, like as a 7, that's very not self-pres. I would be like, just let it go. We'll handle it tomorrow. Let's
that
go
does
to a movie,
not
blah, blah,
support
blah.
a self-pres person, like at all. They will send
not
her
be able
into a tizzy.
They will not be able to relax and enjoy it the way that I would be able to. So even to realize that, to say like, okay, you're not in this headspace because these are the things that need to get done.
Yeah.
How can I help? Being willing to take direction in how you help, instead of helping the way that I just assume is helpful, to say like, what would be the most helpful to you right now? Because then we're speaking the language of that person, and they can come back and speak our language because that is handled. Yeah.
I think one piece of, I mean, maybe work for the self-pres, but also support for people who have self-pres folks in their lives that we've kind of like worked through in therapy is that like, I don't have the same, like as a sexual subtype with very little self-pres, I don't have the same kind of like standard for a lot of the things around the house, we'll say.
Danielle, your face, I love it so
much. And one of the things that we had to really work through is that like, you have always said that you just want me to see it and to do it on my own. But that is not something that will ever be accessible to me.
It's just not possible.
It's just not possible because I don't live in that space. It's not important to me. Yeah. But you are important to me. And so like, you know, last night I turned on Bake Off and I was like, I'm going to fold the laundry. I'm going to put the laundry away. Not because I care about the laundry. I'm fine living out of the laundry basket. That does not bother me at all. I'm fine with that. It bothers you a lot. So as an act of like love and care, I'm going to put the laundry away. And I think allowing that to be my motivation has been a lot of work for you. And then really like leaning into that as a way to love you has been a lot of work for me. That like, I want to love you by like being very like lovey and touchy and you often don't have space for that. But like, you are very receptive when like you can just like chill out and I can put the laundry away instead. Yeah. And so I think, you know, it kind of goes back to that translation of like, the translation has to happen for either one of us to be supported or feel happy. And then can we be okay with the fact that it has to be a translation and it's not necessarily coming from the same place?
Yeah, I think you're saying something really important here, because when you're saying, I need you to be okay with my motivation is not that I care about this laundry. I think often when we're working with the instincts, we're arguing about like, why don't you care about this? Or like, why don't you see it this way? But once we realize that people are coming from different instinctual places, we can let that piece, that motivation piece go, and we can go with intent and impact. And like, it's loving to translate toward your partner or towards your colleague, or, you know, like, I don't really need this, but I know you need this, so I'm going to do it. That's actually more loving than changing your personality to be the same as your partner. You know, now I'm motivated by the same things you are, which is
not possible.
Probably not a thing that even happens, you know? So that's a pretending game anyway. So like, to be able to really appreciate they don't see it the way that I do, and they're still doing it that way out of care for me. Like, that's actually better, and it's much more achievable, you know?
Yeah, and you know, to the self-pres instinct, like, there are lots of times where like you have been willing to not be concerned about the laundry or what have you, and meet me in a more like intensely relational space. Yeah. Like, and I have to know that like that is actually work for you. Just like, you know, me doing the laundry on a regular basis is like work for me. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Do we want to shift to social?
Do we? I was curious which direction you would go.
I don't know. I mean, it's up to
we
you.
can talk social.
Okay.
Sure.
I'm like, I don't want to talk about myself.
It's funny because as you were talking, I'm very aware of how opposite I am.
So let's go to social.
I'm self-pres last, and I'm social first, and that
is definitely the opposite. For
My
Danielle.
social is like, whoa, way down there, subfloor,
subfloor.
Yeah,
like I almost can't do the laundry if there's not a social motivation for it.
Meaning like you got people coming over or something,
or like Ben likes things a certain way. So we've had some like conversations about like I don't care about any of the any details about like how our life is functioning are so boring to me as a social 7.
Yeah, you really have the double whammy in that.
When I get into like when I really feel motivated to do self-pres things is when my 6 gets triggered. But it's like I don't want to lose my people, or I don't want my people to be in pain. So it's like then I will rage clean, or I will like fear clean.
I do that.
Like somebody's upset with me, so now I'm going to clean every single thing, you know. So that's fine. I relate to that. And so you know, I often think about instincts in terms of how do you deep down feel like you know you're okay? And for someone with a social instinct, it's complex because I have to be okay, but my community also has to be okay. So it's very hard for me to feel like I'm okay if my people are in pain. Yeah. Or for me to have fun if my people aren't having fun. So as a 7, I aggressively try to like manipulate people into having fun. Which can be really terrible, actually.
That can also be an asset in relationships.
But it sometimes is an asset.
Right? Like, let's start with what's good. I like how you took the nosedive this time.
Sorry. Well, I'm just thinking, like, it's a very different experience inside of this head. But people in the social subtype are very concerned about the whole of community and their place and belonging in that. And so I would feel much more in danger and vulnerable if I felt like my place in community was threatened than if I felt like my income is threatened. Like, I'd rather be homeless than be exiled, you know? Because I can survive homelessness. We'll figure it out. I'm an assertive type. We'll just fix it, you know? But if I lose my place in community, that is terrifying for me. And so I literally will only do the self-pres things if they are necessary for community, which of course they are. We all need to live indoors and eat food and survive in the world. And so like I get there, but it's definitely, it's the second thing. Yeah. And in my marriage, my husband is 1-to-1 or sexual. And so he is like, if we could live on an island with just me and my son, and Ben, he would be stoked.
Yeah.
Like he's very community focused. He loves community, but he doesn't need a thriving community to feel okay. He just needs to know that Jack and I are okay and our connection is strong. Mm-hmm. And so often we find ourselves in a place where I want to include more people in what we're doing.
Yeah.
And he wishes it was just us. And he often is asking, like, are we not enough for you that you need to go out somewhere else to like get your connection? But the way that a social person is finding that need of like, am I okay? Is like, do I have a thriving community that I belong in? And so I literally will not feel as okay if it's just Ben and Jack and I.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So in terms of what I bring into relationships, I'm often the person that includes more people into something.
Yeah.
So the gift of the social instinct is bringing people into a deeper community, building that like weave tighter, like the fabric of community, where people experience belonging around people who have the social subtype. Even though we all are manipulating things in different ways, you know? Yeah. So like you were saying, sometimes the self-pres sounds like they're selfish, but social people are selfish. They're trying to create the community they want to belong in and then like solidify their place of belonging. Yeah. You know, and so we're all doing it in one way or another. But I'm constantly checking like for holes. I'm constantly checking, are people okay? And so that is a gift. Yeah. To the people that I'm in relationship with, in a corporate setting or in like a work setting, I'm often the person that's building the communal fabric that lots of people don't value that as important, but it actually translates into money. There's tons of research. That's a whole different
translates
podcast.
Into money.
It does. You know, and so that's what social subtype people bring. Yeah.
Yeah. I really resonate with this, like, the need for things to be more, like, more than just, like, you and Ben and Jack. Like, I think that my social is just, like, real close.
Yeah, yeah.
It took you a while to land on what your dominant instinct was.
Yeah, it really did. And it was that
the relationship description.
Yeah, it was the description. I'll put a link to that book in the show notes because it is phenomenal. Highly recommend. It's only $15. It's like a PDF you can download. It's great. But it really was like when you read the social self-pres, because we knew you were self-pres, like right out of the gate. It was like very obvious for me. I always teetered between social and sexual, and seeing the relationship of a self-pres person with a one-to-one or sexual person really hit it home for me.
Exactly.
But, you know, you were saying, like, how do we know that we're okay?
Yeah.
I often phrase it as if one of these things fell apart, which one of them would take down the other two?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Because I think something that would feel very scary to me is being rich and living in a fantastic home by myself. Like being like stuck in security with like no
wealthy but isolated
with no people. Yeah. I would much rather live in like a shed with close relationship, which is in some ways very crazy. You know, I mean, not crazy, but like it's hard to understand, and it's not self-preserving. Yeah. You know, like, but I would in a heartbeat be homeless with Ben versus losing Ben, or you know, like, and so like, do I like nice things? Yes. Do I like a clean house? Yes. Can I live without a clean house if I have good people? Yes. You know, and the opposite would not be true.
Yeah. Yeah. So where do you feel like your social instinct gets you into trouble in relationships? Because it seems like it would be a real asset. Like, and maybe like, I think maybe people from the outside might be like, oh, it's only good. But like, where do you feel like you struggle in relationship with this social instinct?
Yeah, well, being married to someone who's not social, it immediately causes difficulty because, for example, and even in corporate spaces or communal space, I always want to invite more people in. So I have sometimes hurt friends by inviting someone else when they thought it was going to be just us. Yeah. And I've even recently I've had a friend call me out on it, like, because Ben joined us for something, and he was like, I would have really liked to know, like, I like Ben, but like I was like geared up for this, is for like, what's a very different conversation.
Oh, wow, yeah.
You know, and that never occurred to me. To me, like, my value is so like include.
Yeah.
That it sometimes messes up what people are hopeful for. And it sometimes makes it harder to get to me in intimacy because if I'm in a room and there's 12 people, I'm aware of all those people.
Yeah.
So I might be having a conversation with you, but if someone is like looking sad in the corner, I'm aware of that. And now my attention is different.
Yeah.
And so if people know me well, they know, like, yes, she's having this conversation with me, but she also
checking,
like, wants to go take care of that person.
Yeah.
And I think also I struggle to take care of myself if my community is not doing well, or to enjoy something good if other people are not doing well.
Yeah.
And so in terms of actual self-preservation or actual, like, I don't know, self-actualization, you know, and I'm a social subtype who grew up in codependency with an addict. And so that is a part of it. Yeah. And of course, our family of origin stories always dovetail into the Enneagram anyway. But it is often hard for me to know what's true for me if I am in the context of community. So one thing that I have learned, which I'll just like slide over into what the work looks like.
Yeah, that's great. Go for it.
Is for me to know what I need, I actually sometimes need to exit community. And that is very hard for me. It's like going against my instinct. But I need to go, like, you know what? I actually can't think of what I need and want right now next to you. Yeah. Because I'm too aware of you. And so I have to step away and actually create spaces for me to step away and journal or go to a restaurant by myself or like take a long drive and really try to tune into what I think outside of the context of what my community thinks or what my community wants and needs and what my perception of what they want from me is. Yeah. And that has been like painful work because it makes me feel like an idiot. Like, how do you not know? But I literally cannot turn off like that empathetic element of what everybody else is experiencing, which doesn't mean I'm right about it all the time. It's my perception of what they're experiencing. But I have to sometimes physically separate from community to know.
So then how do we support you? What does it look like for people who don't kind of understand that intuitively? What does it look like for us to be supportive of somebody trying to do more of the work in a social like instinct? What do you need?
Dang, I don't know. Let me step away for a minute. I think asking good questions is very supportive. Or like pushing gently, like you're saying this, but does it feel like it really supports you? Is that really what you need? And I won't really like those answers. Yeah. But like, does this really care for you? Like, so having some safe spaces, to really zero in on the person versus their relationship to the community. Yeah. While still being tender toward their belonging. To say like, your belonging is not in flux here. Yeah. But I have this concern, or like, I think you're maybe, for me, it's a overcommitting, you know?
I'm often asking you those questions.
I know.
How are you going to do less, friend?
I yelled at Abby in the car this week. I was like, stop talking to me. You already said this hard thing. No more hard things.
What was it? I had already taken away your mental processing, and now I was going to take away Abby, your Goodreads goal.
This is a different podcast, but Abby told me I was going to think slower forever because I'm now feeling my feelings, because that's my work that I've been doing, which is not about this podcast. And then I was really upset about this idea that this like processing sludge is not going to go away because the fast processing of assertive types is because they're not feeling their feelings. And I was like, what do you mean it's not going to go away? And then Abby tried to tell me I don't have to have a Goodreads goal. And I was like, you can pry my Goodreads goal from my cold, dead fingers. You already took away my processing speed.
Yeah,
that's a whole different podcast. Sorry.
Yeah.
But you know what? It is really helpful to come back, to have a person who knows you well enough to say, I think you're thinking of everybody but you.
Mm-hmm.
And actually that ultimately harms community.
Yeah.
So like, even for the sake of your community, you should take better care of yourself.
Well, and I think sometimes that what I see happening with you and with our relationship in particular is that you're very attached to the role. So like it is about like how the community is functioning, but it's also very much about your place in the community. And so, you know, like with the Goodreads goal or with the fast processing, like there is some threat to your place in community and like,
boo,
right.
Yeah,
and so like really highlighting that, like, you are still a very valuable member of the community, even if you don't have those things.
Right.
You know, even if you are not, you know, super snappy and fast and you're not, you know, really on it, you're still,
I'm going to be snappy and fast, friends.
Right. If you're not entertaining or if you're not X, Y, and Z, like you're still safe here.
Yeah. I think where a self-pres person needs to know they are resourced, I need to know, like, belonging is what is the currency for a social person. And I think being able to support the person in doing their work means making sure that they know their belonging is not at stake.
Yeah. That's huge. Yeah.
And I think making space for the fact that they do tend to see through this lens of the greater community while calling them into deeper relationship, you know, like, especially in terms of like my husband is one-to-one. And so I need to create more space that's just the two of us. Yeah. If every time we do something fun, because we're both sevens, so if doing something fun is like a connection point. So if every single time I'm like, and I'm bringing these 3 people, let's invite more people. Be pissed. Yeah. I mean, eventually, like, he does not feel connected to me through that. Yeah. Because he's not social. Like, he doesn't want to be one of my people.
Other people water things down.
Right.
Like, and as a sexual instinct, like, I feel that. I'm like, I don't like, it is only on occasion that I want more people around. Like, I like going and having a very specific kind of interaction with each person that I'm with. Like, I don't necessarily want, but like, if we're hanging out and then like 6 other people show up, I'm like,
okay, bye.
No, thanks.
Yeah. And I mean, you get different things too, because like, if the more people that I'm in connection with, the more belonging opportunities I have, you know, like,
yeah, that's a good one.
But what Ben wants, and I'm curious what word you would put there, but like, he wants intimacy. So like you said, it waters it down. Yeah. You can't have that leaned in conversation and that shorthand if there's other people you have to like explain things to, or like, let me tell you the story. This is what we're talking about, or, you know, and so you're not going to get that intimacy. Yeah. And so like, it's different than belonging, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I guess that leaves me.
Yeah, let's talk about the one-to-one. Can you talk a little bit about why some people call it one-to-one and some people call it sexual?
I think some people, well, it was originally called the sexual instinct, and I think some people are afraid of sex, and so they said one-to-one. And there are some like things to back up that, like, it's not wholly about like the physicality of sex. It's not just your sexuality that is like in play, although that is a big part of it often. Right. But what I have kind of come to understand the sexual instinct is really about like self-transcendence. Like, it's like, I want to know myself through a connection with one other person or one other thing. So it could be like the intensity and the intimacy of like my marriage, or it could be the intensity and the intimacy of my projects, right, that I throw myself into, or it could be like my connection and intimacy with the divine and how I'm connecting on my spiritual path.
Yeah,
like,
it's like union.
Yeah, union is the word that's often used to describe it, that I think is really
I like that.
Really helpful. Like, I want to feel connected to who I'm interfacing with.
Which is why like you could have the one-to-one instinct and be like an asexual person, correct?
Yes, right, exactly. Sure. So it's like, it doesn't have to, it doesn't like, those are different intersecting identities. So I have several clients who identify as asexual, but also see themselves very clearly in the sexual instinct because it's about this like union, this self-transcendence, this like deep, intimate connection that you don't see in the self-pres instinct or in the social instinct. That's still very valid and very valuable to human thriving. Right.
Sure.
Whether it has to do with the physical act of sex or not. We often see the like, they talk about like, oh, well, we have to have this like physical, like sexual instinct because that's how we procreate. And so evolutionary speaking, blah, blah, blah. Like that's a valuable part of it. But when it comes to like the whole person and the whole psychology, there's more to it than that.
Right.
So
I think for some people, sexuality ends with their primary partnership. But like the sexual instinct falls into every way that you're going about things.
Yes.
In all of your relationships. And so I think the benefit of the one-to-one is that people kind of get that picture a little bit more. But I think it has definitely been used more and more as churches have adopted the Enneagram. They're like, we can't say sexual.
Yeah.
But our sexuality does, it is part of our personality, even when we're not having sex with our partner.
Yeah.
We have a very limited vocabulary and tolerance for talking about the way that our sexuality moves out into the world with us.
Yeah.
Like, it's like we only can hide it behind a door. You know?
Just to like give some like insight around that for me is like, I didn't realize that I was queer until 24, 25. And I had been in a straight relationship, and obviously the sexual act was not something that was as prevalent in my life as it is now. For obvious reasons. But right. But what was interesting about that is that the sexual instinct was still very much at play and was like driving my musical career. Right. So like I had a project that I was pushing intensely and had a lot of energy around and really was like pushing this like feeling of self-transcendence in an extreme way through that project, to the extent that it really wasn't that healthy for me. And as I came out and, you know, found more life-giving avenues for my sexual instinct, like I feel like the balance of my life has been, is much better. Like, yes, I still put a lot of energy into my work and my projects and, you know, this podcast and like doing all this stuff. But it feels much more in balance than it was when I was younger.
Sure.
Yeah. But what do I bring in relationship? Yeah. Well, I definitely am really into relationship, like in a like this sort of way. Like I'm into this, and this is what I'm like invested in.
Yeah. Well, I think that instinct, like you make people feel wanted.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah,
like that is just very true, and that's not just true for me.
Yeah.
Like when you have your energy focused on me, I'm like, wow, like this person really wants me. You know, like it feels legitimate. Like there's no questioning. That there's no doubt around it. But I think you bring that to other people in your life too, where it's like, oh, you really make people feel seen, and like you want them.
Yeah. It's like a ray gun.
Yeah. Well, they do say that about
like pointed.
Yeah. That is a thing about the one-to-one folks, right? Is that it's like intense eye contact, right? It's like that's the kind of energy that they bring.
Yeah. And like I'm always finding a way to be connected to people. Like, you know, like I'll dig through and I'll be like, where are we connected? And where can we find the foundation of this connection? Yeah. Like I remember meeting a new barista when I was working at Stout House. Like she had like just moved to town. I was like, oh, where'd you move from? And she was like, oh, Missouri. And I was like, oh, my family's in Missouri. And then, you know, I'm like digging deeper. And she's like, oh, I worked at Starbucks. I was like, which Starbucks? And she was like, oh, the one on the highway. And I was like, oh, do you know Chloe? And she's like, yeah, I worked with her. And I was like, yeah, that's my cousin. And so like that's the kind of thing that I'm always digging for, is like, where can we establish
like an
intense
walking
connection?
Game of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
yeah, to some extent. And I really like that. Like, I'm always like, oh, how are we connected? Because I come in with that assumption.
Yeah.
That's like, and like, we're going to have something to, like, I'm going to find what it is that we're going to be able to connect over.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that that's really valuable. And not everybody likes that. Like, not everybody is into the like digging that I know I do. Like,
yeah, you don't get a lot of soft, meaningless small talk from one-to-one people.
And no. Although I feel like I can do that fairly well. Like, my social instinct is high enough, and I like people enough, generally speaking, that like. But the problem is, if we do the small talk, if we do the like, oh, how's the weather? It will eventually, like, if we talk long enough, I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like for people who don't have a lot of comfort with that, like, don't have a lot of space for that, it can, or they don't know themselves very well, that can be really threatening. And so like, like, it is like a ray gun, and you don't always want a ray gun pointed at you, like, you don't want to have your soul bared in front of another person. So I get that sometimes I really need to tone it back, which, I mean, the 8 type structure also doesn't help that. So it's like, I have intensity on top of intensity.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. Womp, womp.
Plus the wing 7.
Right. So it's like, I have zero chill in my personality. Every piece of chill I've had to learn over these last many years.
And you through yoga, even as a barista, you learn how to have small talk. You have to. It's like a job requirement, so you've invested energy in being able to manufacture some chill, but it's not coming from the core. No. And I remember working at Stout House, right? Like, trying to be more social and all that stuff. The only time I was ever like reprimanded or like written up at Stout House, they don't do write-ups or whatever, but it was just like, you are too loud.
I think it was specifically your laugh was too loud.
Yeah, my laugh was too loud.
I also have been reprimanded for loud laughing.
Cheers.
Let's just take a moment to...
We're going to show off these mugs. We have such great mugs. Look at these great mugs.
See, as the self-pres, I'm going to take credit for all these mugs.
Yep.
Because I have collected them.
Yeah, they're great.
They're beautiful. We'll put a link to this ceramicist.
Yeah. We did decide that this one was social.
And this one is self-pres.
And then this one was sexual.
Because it has a hole, you guys.
I don't know. It says phallic, right? I don't know.
It's silly. Okay.
There is an intensity about it. Like, that is a much more intense cup than either one of these.
It's also the mug that I feel most represents the type 4. Like, that's why I chose it. Because I'm like, it's very special.
It's dark and brooding.
It's very special.
Yeah.
Can I say something else you do well in relationship? You are very good at maintaining and prioritizing intimacy. And not just sex, but like, like, you are like, we need to do date nights, blah, blah, blah. Like, that sort of like relationship, like maintenance you're good at. Yeah. Whereas like, I'll just kind of let
we could fall into being coworkers if like roommates, if like, this was not the energy I was bringing to the situation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because my priority is just so much on like the functioning, right? Like, so yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it does. I do think it. I'm currently having a lot of struggles with this energy because it can be really difficult to operate in the family unit with this energy. Like, I really struggle with just the like day to day getting kids fed, getting them to school, like. I struggle with that. I don't feel like I really know how to operate in that. But like, if I get like solo time with the kids, or we're like doing something together, we have a project or we have an activity that we can all do, like, that's where I feel like I can really shine as a parent. But I definitely think it's a real struggle. I mean, essentially to have to be subject to the monotony of life,
self-preservation,
right? Of all of the self-pres things,
children
like,
preservation.
So I definitely think that that's a struggle for me. And again, like, there is a piece of like, not everyone wants to connect with so much intensity,
especially in the morning. I think
and I am a morning person, so again, double whammy.
Like, you need no intensity in the morning. You just need routine.
Yeah.
To like have a really, like good foundation to your day.
Yeah. And like, and literally like my, my morning routine is like coming out into the morning and having my like intense, spiritual alone time where it's like me and the divine are like one-on-one, right? Where like, that's where I feel good, but then I'm like amped up and I'm like, okay, like I can do this day, but the rest of the house is not really like calibrated to that. So it's challenging.
So I'm going to keep us on track here.
Thank you.
I'm preserving this schedule. What is your work?
I mean, like in everything, it's slowing down. It's allowing there to be other kinds of, contact and connection.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think particularly in our marriage, not demanding that all of my intimacy come from you I think is really important. And just like acknowledging that like, that's not like the fact that you can't meet that is not a reflection of you or your love and care for me or any of those things. It's just like, that's not where you're coming from. And so like being more tuned to care for myself and like seek that out in other spaces that is like, like supportive and that sort of thing, like you're not a super social person and that's okay, but I am. And so like finding that connection and, intensity in other places, I think is important. And then being mindful of like, okay, with the kids, like I don't do the monotony well, I really, really struggle there. But then just being intentional about like finding the time to do that,
right.
Do the thing that I do well with the kids. So like taking them out and having one-on-one time. I do that well. And I can see that like, even like I thrived like that with my parents. Like that was a really big thing, is that like, I don't have a lot of like big family memories with my parents. I have like, my dad would take me out for a special day and it would just be us and we'd go do these things. And then like my mom was always just like, it was like a one-on-one thing. And so I see that as my like strength in parenting and trying to like be intentional that like, it's not always the way that the kids want to relate. But like being intentional about creating that space and then allowing more space to like back off and let other people run the show for a while. I'm not good at that. But I mean, I would think that that's like the work. But yeah, as far as like how people support somebody with a sexual instinct, like, I mean, I think you kind of touched on it with like talking about you and Ben. Ask before you invite other people to the function. Yes. Like
learn
that's
from
big.
me, friends.
Because sometimes I'm like totally down with that, but other times I'm like, no, that's gonna like that scrambles my brain a little bit.
Well, it will just meet a sexual person. It won't meet their needs.
Yeah.
So if you care about that person, it's not just about like they don't really feel like it. They won't get what they were looking for if you turn it from a one-on-one into like a 6-person table. Yeah. And so just being aware of that, that you're meeting your need, but you're throwing theirs under the bus. Yeah. If you're social.
Yeah. And so just being like sensitive to that, I think is really important. And it's the same kind of thing that like we do often. Yeah. That like, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say like I feel like part of the work that I've done to support you in our relationship has been to like really acknowledge that like I'm never going to get to the end of my self-preservation shit. Like that's not how that works. You know, like I will never have enough, or it will never be, it will never feel like I've done enough because it can't, because that work is ongoing. Yeah. So having to like, remind myself of that. Like I can't get to the end of this list and then connect with you. Yeah. Like I'm going to have to just pause, connect, and then know that work is going to be waiting for me because it is.
Yeah, I think there's something really like powerful here for all of the instincts that like we're never all going to have all of our needs met before we can reach out to the other person, right? Or people, right? If it's a larger social situation. And so like being able to like do a little bit here and a little bit there, like touch into self-pres, touch into social, make those like small movements here and there, does so much to preserve relationship. And it actually costs less than you think. You know, like it costs less than I anticipate to do the laundry. Right. Although in my head, I have this like narrative about how just it's going to take all day and it's going to drain me of all of my life force. And when in reality, it's like, no, it's going to take maybe 15 minutes and it doesn't take that much time or energy, but it will actually give back so much more because then you will feel supported. And if you feel more supported, then you're more available to support me.
I feel that way. Like we were talking about how it's going to cost you and it's going to deplete you. I mean, I'm thinking, oh, that's kind of how I think sometimes about like sex or going to a party or whatever. And I'm like, oh, God, like I can't muster that or I don't have the capacity for it. And then you find out on the other side of it, you're like, oh, actually, that great. Gave me more juice than, you know, I
think one way that you can support people who are in the sexual instinct is, especially when things are busy or when you're feeling overwhelmed at home, to create a container for intimacy, to plan it, to go somewhere else. Like if you're self-pres, especially, get out of the house. And like this is about our connection. Because just like making the plan for that and this is just gonna be you and me connecting, that by itself speaks volumes to people that are in that instinct.
Yeah. And I think, you know, kind of to what you were both saying is that like, we think these things are going to cost us a lot and then they actually give us something on the other side. It's like, it's important to remember that actually we need all three of these in order to function.
Yes,
right?
we
Like
do.
again, like this is, we keep coming back to this. So to be healthy, whole people, we need to develop all of these things within us. And so there's a lot of value in that and taking cues from the people in our lives who see things differently than we do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we did it, y'all. That was a good one. Thank you, Danielle, for being on and hopping in and doing this with us. It was nice to have some self-pres energy on the pod. We've not had that recently, ever. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for spending time with us. Be sure to click like, subscribe, drop a comment down below. Let us know your subtype, all that good stuff. If you're listening to the audio version, be sure to rate the podcast, give us a rating and a review. That does so much to help people find us. We have a workshop coming up in just a couple weeks on January 20th. Come join us for the Enneagram and relationships. What am I missing?
I think you're set.
Oh, yeah, we did it.
We did it.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
Cheers.